It wasn't her beauty that made my hands tremble, it was the way she looked at me, as if she already knew. I never thought much about visiting my friend's house. It was familiar, comfortable, and predictable, the kind of place where I could kick off my shoes, laugh too loudly, and never worry about being judged. But that day, something shifted. Or maybe I shifted. When she walked into the room, his mom, I noticed her differently. Not in the careless, passing way I usually did, but in the way you notice a painting that you've seen 100 times before, only this time the light hits it just right, and suddenly you see details you've never seen before. She was carrying a tray, glasses of iced tea balanced with a practiced steadiness. The late afternoon sun slanted through the wide window behind her, laying a golden frame around her figure. I remember the faint clink of the ice cubes as she set the tray on the table, the gentle movement of her wrist, the way a lock of her hair slipped forward and she brushed it back almost unconsciously. I sat there, pretending to scroll through my phone, but my eyes betrayed me. She wasn't just my friend's mom anymore. She was something more. Graceful. Confident. The kind of woman who had lived enough to carry a quiet strength in the way she moved, and yet there was softness in her presence too, a warmth that filled the room without demanding attention. I noticed the fine lines at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, not flaws but maps of laughter and late nights and maybe heartbreak too. I noticed the faint trace of perfume in the air, something floral but mature, the kind that doesn't announce itself but stays with you quietly. My chest felt tight, and though nothing extraordinary was happening, it felt like everything inside me was suddenly alert. She asked if we wanted more sugar, her voice smooth, carrying that effortless authority mothers always seem to have. My friend answered quickly, distracted by his phone call, but I could only nod, my throat oddly dry. It was strange, the way my pulse quickened just because she stood a few feet away. Strange, how ordinary details, the curve of her smile, the sound of her bracelets clinking as she adjusted them, seemed magnified. And for the first time, I wondered if she could feel it too. The shift in the air. The quiet electricity of being seen differently. I lowered my gaze before it lingered too long, but it was already too late. That first spark had caught, and I knew I wouldn't forget this moment. It happened so naturally that I almost didn't notice at first. My friend's phone buzzed, sharp and insistent, and he muttered something about needing to take the call outside where the signal was better. Then the front door clicked shut, and suddenly it was just the two of us. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, but it was noticeable. The kind of quiet where you hear the small things, the faint hum of the air conditioner, the ticking of a clock on the wall, the distant bark of a dog outside. She sat across from me, her posture relaxed yet composed, legs crossed gracefully. For the first time, I was acutely aware of how close she really was. She broke the silence first. "So," she said, her voice even but carrying a hint of curiosity, "how are your classes going?" Her tone was casual, but there was something in her eyes, a deliberate attentiveness that made me feel like I was being studied. I cleared my throat, buying time. "Good. I mean, busy. Sometimes overwhelming." She smiled lightly, tilting her head just slightly, and it made her hair shift over one shoulder. "That's how it should be at your age. Busy means you're building something." I nodded, though words felt clumsy in my mouth. I wasn't used to being spoken to like this, not as someone's kid, not as her son's friend, but as if I were an equal. Someone whose thoughts mattered. Her hand rested lightly on the rim of her glass, tracing it absently as if her mind was elsewhere, but her eyes never left mine. Every time I tried to hold her gaze, I felt my heartbeat stumble, so I looked away, at the window, at the framed photos on the wall, anywhere but directly at her. Still, I couldn't escape the awareness of her. The faint shimmer of her bracelet as she shifted her arm. The way the light caught the smoothness of her skin. The quiet authority she carried, even in something as small as asking about my life. I realized then how rare it felt to be truly listened to. She wasn't just making conversation, she was giving me her attention, fully and without distraction. And it did something to me, it made me want to answer honestly, to show her the version of myself I usually kept hidden. But before I could say more, her smile deepened, as if she could sense my hesitation. "You remind me of someone," she murmured softly, almost to herself. I didn't ask who. I didn't dare. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, charged and alive, as if the room itself was holding its breath. It started with something so ordinary it should have meant nothing. She asked if I could hand her the book resting on the side table, just beyond her reach. A simple gesture. A favor anyone could have done without thinking. But the moment my fingers brushed against hers, time seemed to slow. Her hand was cool at first, the smoothness of her skin startling against the warmth of mine. For a second, neither of us moved. The book hung between us, forgotten. My breath caught in my chest, and when I dared to glance up, her eyes were already on me. There was nothing overt in her expression, but the silence pressed down, thick and charged. It wasn't the touch itself, it was the pause that followed. The way her fingers lingered, not snatching the book away immediately, but staying there, lightly against mine as if deciding whether to pull back. My pulse hammered, and I knew she must have felt the slight tremor in my hand. I tried to steady myself, gripping the book tighter, but it only made the moment feel more noticeable. Her lips parted as if to say something, then closed again. Instead, she gave the faintest smile, small but enough to make my stomach turn in knots. She finally took the book, her fingertips brushing over mine as if on purpose, though I couldn't be sure. The sound of the air conditioner faded. The ticking clock blurred into nothing. All I could focus on was the echo of her touch, still burning on my skin. I leaned back slightly, trying to mask the sudden rush of heat in my face, but it was too late. The air between us had shifted. What had been polite conversation minutes earlier now carried an unspoken weight. She flipped the book open absently, though I noticed her eyes weren't on the pages. They darted back to me for the briefest moment, and in that look, I felt something unspoken pass between us. Curiosity. Caution. Maybe even recognition of the same tension I was struggling to hide. I told myself it was nothing. Just a brush of hands. Just coincidence. But my body didn't believe me. My chest felt tight, my palms clammy. It was the smallest contact, so small it could have been ignored, explained away, forgotten. And yet, I knew in that instant that I wouldn't forget it. Because it wasn't just a touch. It was a spark. The evening stretched on, and little by little, the house quieted. My friend was still upstairs, his muffled voice drifting through the floorboards as he laughed into his phone. I wandered into the kitchen, telling myself I was just thirsty, just looking for something to do. She was there, already leaning against the counter, a mug in her hand, the soft glow of the kitchen light wrapping her in warmth. She glanced up at me, her eyes catching mine for just a moment before sliding back down to the steaming coffee. "Couldn't sit still either?" she asked gently, her tone carrying a faint weariness beneath the surface. I managed a half-smile, stepping closer. "Guess not." The air was different here, quieter, more intimate. I noticed the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped ever so slightly once she thought no one was looking. It was the first time I saw her not just as confident, not just as graceful, but as human. She sipped her coffee, then set the mug down carefully, her fingers tapping against the ceramic as though she needed something to steady herself. "Some nights feel longer than others," she said softly, her voice carrying an edge of truth that didn't sound rehearsed. I waited, sensing she wasn't just filling silence. She glanced at me again, almost as if testing whether I was someone she could trust. "When the house is quiet like this," she continued, "it reminds me how quickly time moves. Kids grow up, people drift, and suddenly you wonder if you've missed something you should have held on to tighter." Her words settled in the space between us, heavier than anything she'd said before. I didn't know what to say at first, but the vulnerability in her eyes called for honesty. "I don't think you've missed anything," I said quietly. "I think, sometimes we just don't realize what we have until the quiet makes us notice." Her lips curved into a faint, almost grateful smile. It wasn't the kind of smile meant to brush things off, it was the kind that admitted she'd been heard. For a fleeting moment, her composure slipped, and I caught a glimpse of her loneliness, her longing, the part of her that lived beneath the strong exterior she showed everyone else. The golden kitchen light flickered against her features, softening her expression. And as she looked at me, really looked, I felt something shift again. This wasn't about attraction anymore. It was about connection, fragile, unspoken, and real. It happened later that night, in the most ordinary way. She asked if I could help carry a box of old dishes from the dining room into the storage cabinet. It wasn't heavy, just awkward, and when she bent down to adjust it, I stepped in beside her. Our hands met on the same edge of the box, and that's when I realized, my fingers were trembling. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the coolness of the evening air, maybe the strain of balancing the weight. But when I glanced up, her eyes caught mine, steady and searching. She noticed. We placed the box on the counter together, the faint scrape of cardboard against wood echoing too loudly in the quiet. My hand lingered on the edge a moment longer, knuckles pale from how tightly I gripped it. She tilted her head, her voice lowering into something soft, almost a whisper. "Your hands are shaking." The words slipped into the space between us like a secret. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. I could have laughed it off. I could have blamed the weight or the chill. But something inside me refused to hide anymore. My voice came out lower than I expected, almost breathless. "Because you're this close." The silence that followed was unbearable and beautiful at once. She didn't move. Her face was only a few inches from mine, close enough that I could see the delicate curve of her lashes, the faint shimmer of light against her lips. I felt her breath graze my skin, warm and steady, while mine stumbled in uneven bursts. Her eyes widened just slightly, not with shock, but with recognition. As if she'd already felt it too, long before I dared to put words to it. Her hand shifted, fingertips brushing against the counter, then closer, close enough to graze the back of mine. It was the faintest contact, but it sent a rush of heat straight through me. I thought she might step back. I thought she might smile and dismiss it. But she didn't. She simply stayed there, caught in the same stillness I was, suspended in a moment neither of us seemed willing to break. The ticking clock in the living room sounded louder, the hum of the refrigerator steadier, grounding, while everything inside me unraveled in silence. My hands were still shaking. Not from weakness, not from fear, but because she was close enough to touch, and I didn't know what would happen if I did. The silence between us felt alive, as though the air itself had thickened. My confession still hovered there, fragile, undeniable. "Because you're this close." I wondered if she could hear how loud my heart was beating, each thud pounding against the quiet like a drum. She didn't step away. Not immediately. Instead, she studied me. Her gaze was calm, but searching, as though she was reading something written across my face. I couldn't move, caught between wanting her to look away and needing her to keep looking forever. Then, slowly, she laid her hand on my arm. It was such a simple touch, but the effect was devastating. Her palm was warm, steady against the trembling tension in my muscles. It wasn't a pull or a push, just an anchor, grounding me when everything inside me felt unsteady. "You don't have to be nervous," she murmured, her voice low, carrying something gentler than warning and softer than reassurance. I looked down at her hand resting lightly on my sleeve. Her fingers pressed just enough for me to feel the weight of them, delicate yet sure. My throat tightened, words caught somewhere between honesty and restraint. I wanted to tell her everything, how long I'd noticed her, how impossible it felt to stand this close without reaching for more. But the moment itself was louder than anything I could say. The lamp in the corner glowed softly, casting shadows that moved across her face, painting her features in amber light. Her eyes shone with something unreadable, a flicker of hesitation or maybe curiosity, as if she was balancing on the same fragile line I was. I didn't lean closer. Neither did she. And yet, it felt as though we had. The inches between us were charged, brimming with possibility, as though the air could ignite if either of us made the wrong move. Or the right one. Her hand lingered a second longer, her thumb brushing, barely, over the fabric of my sleeve before she let go. The absence of her touch was immediate, a chill settling where her warmth had been, but the echo of it stayed, thrumming beneath my skin. She drew a small breath, composed, and stepped back just enough to break the spell, though her eyes lingered. "You should help me put the rest away," she said, her voice steadier now, but the edges softer. And though nothing more was said, I knew that moment would never leave me. Because silence, shared like that, says more than words ever could. The sound of footsteps upstairs broke the stillness like a stone dropped into calm water. My friend was finally coming back down, his laughter trailing from the phone call he was still half finished with. The spell between us snapped, though not in a way that erased what had happened. It simply folded the moment into something private, tucked quietly into the spaces only we would remember. She pulled her hand back completely then, adjusting the edge of the box we had set on the counter. Her movements were composed again, graceful in their simplicity, as though nothing unusual had passed between us. But her eyes betrayed her, they lingered for a beat too long, holding mine, soft but cautious, before she turned away. By the time my friend walked into the kitchen, she was already moving with practiced ease, sliding the box to one side, her tone light as she asked about his call. I played along, joining their small talk, but every word I spoke felt like it belonged to someone else. Inside, I was still replaying that whisper, her hand on my arm, the closeness that had made my whole body tremble. Later, when the night wound down, my friend clapped me on the back, thanking me for hanging out. He was already half distracted again, talking about plans for the weekend. I nodded, smiled, and let him lead the way to the door. She followed quietly, her steps measured, her presence filling the hallway like a shadow I couldn't stop noticing. At the door, he waved casually, heading back upstairs for something he'd forgotten. And that's when it was just us again. The house had that nighttime stillness now, quiet, heavy, intimate. She stood a little apart from me, the porch light glowing behind her, outlining her silhouette in soft gold. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled, not the polite smile she gave guests, not the casual one she used to fill silence, but something different. A smile that felt, knowing. Her hand reached for mine, brief and careful, but deliberate. She squeezed gently, just enough for me to feel the warmth of her skin one last time. "Take care of yourself," she said softly, her voice barely more than a murmur. It wasn't much. Not a confession, not a promise. But in that quiet squeeze, in the weight of her gaze, I felt everything she couldn't say. I stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against my face, sharp after the warmth of the house. She stood in the doorway, watching, her figure outlined against the soft glow behind her. I wanted to turn back, to hold her eyes longer, but I didn't. Some things are too fragile to stretch thin. As the door closed slowly, I realized I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I carried her whisper, her touch, her silence, all the things that meant more than words ever could. And though nothing had been spoken outright, I knew we had both felt it. A connection too strong to name, too dangerous to claim, but too real to ever forget.